everyone. Thank you, Coca and Chen-Lin Kim, for this honor to talk to the LicensingCon participants about IP licensing for global film and television projects. My name is Kymber Lim. I'm the CEO and producer at MAJYK Studios and formerly consultant for Netflix International Originals, mostly in Asia. I'll be your moderator for this panel with Erik Barmack and Taylor Grant. Erik, can you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Erik Barmack. I headed up international originals at Netflix for 5 years or so. And then more recently started a production company, Wild Sheep Content, that's focused largely on international IP and packaging. And we've been able to set up so far 18 projects with streamers like Netflix, Amazon, Disney, companies like Viacom and Universal, Roku, and others. So excited to talk about IP today.
Great. Go ahead, Taylor.
I'm Taylor Grant. I'm currently the head of global animation for Wattpad WEBTOON Studios. Originally founded WEBTOON Studios, which is the film and television production arm of US WEBTOON. We were recently merged into 2 companies. Our parent company Neighbor acquired Wattpad. So Wattpad Studios and WEBTOON Studios forged a new fully funded studio. And we recently restructured into a film, television, and animation division. So I'm currently overseeing animation.
Great, thank you. Well, today's session is called "Who Will Be the Next Marvel?" And speaking of Marvel, you know, we know that they started in comics back in 1939, a long time ago, but they've really evolved into now what we refer to as the Marvel Universe, and rapidly accelerated its growth since 2008, I think, with the revamp of Iron Man with Robert Downey Jr. And then they were able to sell to Disney in 2009 for $4 billion. Sounds like a crazy made up number. Still, Marvel kept developing their brand and superheroes to dominate the market ever since then. So I'd really like to start breaking down some of that. And maybe we can start with you, Erik, in terms of getting your thoughts on what you feel really contributed to its success and why.
Well, one thing is just time and having characters around in the consciousness of multiple generations globally for decades. And so sometimes I think when we talk about developing IP and developing franchises, there's an impatience, and it just simply requires honing characters, honing plot lines, and having lots of different types of people engaged. You know, secondarily, I would say before Marvel was sold to Disney, they had already kind of reclaimed their IP as a studio. And so they moved away from this idea of we're just going to license out our properties for the quick buck to wait a minute, we need to think holistically about how we're growing our characters and our universe. And that was done very thoughtfully, and it was done around the time you mentioned with Iron Man rebooting, but even before that, with some of their animated series. You know, and I would say the other thing that is driving Marvel is that so much of television and film can be dark and a little bit nihilistic. And I sort of think that as platforms become more global, one of the things that cuts through is things that are aspirational, funny, light at times. And so I think they've really focused on qualities that make their IP truly international, because you could have easily envisioned, say, Iron Man being a dark, really sort of existential type of film. And I think they designed their universe with families in mind, and with the idea that it was going to travel if the tone was a bit lighter.
Yeah, I think that I'll turn it over to Taylor to see if he has anything to add to that. where do you think has contributed to, some of Marvel's accelerated success? Sure.
Well, I mean, Erik, said it beautifully, and I agree with everything he said. I think also, not to get too idealistic, but there's a lesson to be learned, I think, from Marvel, not only on their successes but also some of their failures. I think if you look at the history of Marvel adaptations through the 70s, 80s, and 90s, there was, not everything was necessarily, we'll say, prestige. And to Erik's point, they were basically licensing products out. There wasn't a lot of creative oversight at the time. And post Marvel Studios and post the Iron Man with Robert Downey Jr., there became this focus on respecting the audience, for lack of a better phrase. It's as a Marvel reader my entire life, these movies post the original Iron Man with Robert Downey Jr., I feel like they keep the spirit of the comics. They respect the audience, rather than just seeing us as dollar signs. And I think that the characters are not, with exception to maybe Captain America, a lot of the characters are very universal and relatable to everyone. So, Spider-Man being, we've all felt like the outsider, Hulk dealing with his dark side. I think these are sort of, characters and archetypes that we are very relatable from a global perspective. So I think for that reason, they've really been embraced.
Yeah, we're all fans of their films, especially since they rebooted. And I really think that the authenticity of these characters, because they do seem to, not be so traditionally Hollywood, meaning they're all good or all bad, but they are really flawed characters, but they are superheroes and make so much of that so much fun. If we can go into a little bit about just in terms of what's happening with the global market and, looking at maybe some of the things that they may have done from a global standpoint, is there anything else outside of just relatable characters that you feel may have contributed to their success?
Sure. Erik, I'm going to start it. I would say that one of the things that's kept that franchise fresh is, I'm going to close one of my windows here so that it's not making noise, is some would argue that there's a certain formulaicness to Marvel movies. And I could see that argument, but there's a certain familiarity that also makes them very appealing. Kind of know what you're going to get into when you walk into a Marvel movie. And yet they still keep it fresh because they hire really exciting directors who have interesting visions. And so when you look at the Marvel movies from a Black Panther, it's very, very different than this kind of spy movie model they used for Winter Soldier, or the comedics, heist movie model they used for Ant-Man, or the sort of Shakespearean fantasy of Thor. So I think that while there's a familiarity at the core of them, which makes us invested in the characters and want to keep coming back, they feel fresh. From Shang-Chi to, again, Black Panther, I think are really good examples of that.
What do you think, Erik?
Yeah, I mean, I think Taylor hit it square on. I think they're well crafted. They're not overexposing characters, so you'll see the Avengers out every couple of years, but it's not like they're running the franchises into the ground. They'll rest certain characters, so there's a freshness to it. They have great directors, and they just tend to be very high quality movies.
Yeah, I think it's always exciting when a new Marvel movie comes out, and I think that definitely contributes to their success for sure. If we're looking at and speaking to IP holders, and I would love to talk about IP now that is being generated in these foreign markets. And how you guys feel in terms of when you are looking for IP to acquire and also turn into other content and entertainment, do you feel that you're spending more time internationally looking at stuff? Has that increased for you guys at all?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'll go first. I'd say the likelihood of the next franchise coming that's like a Marvel coming from outside of the US is much, much higher than it coming from Los Angeles. And so, some of the things that we worked on at Netflix, like Lupin and Casa de Papel, The Witcher, all of those are examples of IP that were generated or had been around from places outside of the US. I think what you're seeing is that as global streamers take more and more mind share, people are realizing that there's not a deficiency, but in fact a strength in having IP come from outside of the US. And that some of what had happened previously, like if you look at a lot of the adaptations of Japanese manga or anime, things like Ghost in the Shell or other examples where there was an adaptation that was trying to force that type of IP into a US studio model, that's going to be less successful as an outcome than trying to respect the language, the culture, the IP from where it's based. And so, like when we talk about where the next Marvel comes from, it's already there. It's Shueisha. It's a lot of the stuff that Taylor's doing with Webtoons. It's these franchises that I've mentioned in Europe. We needed a global platform to exist to take advantage of them.
Yeah, I agree 1,000%. I think probably Squid Game will come up along this conversation just because it's, it's really showcased that idea, sort of antiquated idea now of taking international IP and then reworking it into this new, Americanized version isn't necessary anymore. And in fact, has not been very successful for us. We've seen from Old Boy to The Uninvited, which was based on, Tale of the Two Sisters, which is one of my favorite horror films of all time, by the way. And, we're just seeing that these sort of unadulterated original versions can play very well globally now. And I think audiences are much more sophisticated. And thanks to streaming services like Netflix, we've been exposed to so much more storytelling from different cultures that it's becoming more mainstream.
Yeah, so when you guys are actually looking at the foreign markets for IP, what are some of the criteria, that you guys seek out, and what are the things that you guys are looking for, and are there any particular genres that appeal to you more?
Yeah, I think we look from the perspective that global streamers are going to try to grow their subscriber bases outside of the US. And so we first look at, is a piece of IP big and relevant in a local market? So for example, we picked up the rights to Yakuza, which is a big Sega video game in Japan, and it sold 13 or 14 million copies worldwide, but it's especially popular in Japan. I think it sold 7 million plus copies there. And so you think, if I'm a streamer or if someone's bringing this property to me, I already know that there's kind of an installed base of gamers in markets that are very important to me, that will serve as kind of a marketing lift for a show that's based on it. And so now we're in the process of writing that show, and I think there's a lot of reasons for optimism about that. In Scandinavia, we're working with an author named Emily Shep, who did a book called Mark for Life, which is a little bit like an Alias type show. It's sort of part noir, part action thriller, where this trained assassin has to solve a case in Sweden. And I bring it up because we've also sold that one into development. And I think it's particularly interesting if you're a little bit of an outsider in a culture to sort of find stuff that's disruptive. So maybe we would be less successful if we were doing the 65-year-old detective slow burn Scandi show, but like something that's new and a little bit dynamic and a mix of action, and that genre could be interesting. And so, you know, but I would say it's really 90% of what we're doing is trying to find these reasonably big clusters of audiences outside of the US in genres that we think haven't always been done before.
Very much in alignment there. The only thing I can really add is that we're relatively new, but we do have the huge advantage of deep analytics and machine learning on our platforms. And so we have the ability to, particularly on the Wattpad side, we have the ability to not only see what's trending now and what has legs, but also see trends that no one is even aware of. For example, recently sort of a seemingly random hashtag was exploding on the Wattpad platform, which is Muslim love. So hashtag Muslim love became this massive trend that we saw on our platform. And there's apparently millions and millions of folks who want to read about romance in the Muslim community. And so now we're developing something in-house based on a very successful Muslim love story.
Huh.
So, which is very interesting.
Very interesting.
Right. Yeah,
that is really interesting. And kind of touching on what Erik mentioned in terms of like disrupting culture and the things that you could be looking at, you know, within your own culture that has really not been exposed to the world. Does that seem in line with what you are finding in your platform, Taylor?
Yes, we're surprised all the time, which is, you know, one of the great things about our algorithmic, you know, data team, what they do and what we're able to learn on a daily basis through not only just like readership, but also through comments of our, you know, so we've got 90 million active users on Wattpad and 70 million active users on WEBTOON. So that's, you know, deep intelligence on what people are looking for internationally. So yeah, we lean into that quite a bit.
And do they, not to dispose of secrets from the company, but are there particular genres that seem to kind of rise to the top in terms of IP on the platform?
Sure. Well, I think one of this, this actually relates to both Wattpad and WEBTOON, but I would say that romance has been an incredibly underserved audience for a very long time. And there's a tremendous global appetite for romance. On the WEBTOON side specifically, as much as I love Marvel and DC and IDW and Dark Horse and all the great comic publishers, you know, they were pretty much dominated by superheroes, action, you know, things of that nature, voice-centric IP. And women were sort of, you know, relegated to whatever they could get. But, you know, with WEBTOON, we're 65% female readership. Mm-hmm. We're also 65% female creators. And so we've tapped into this incredibly underserved audience of women who love comics, who love to read, and want to read slice of life. They want to read romance. They want to read all the associated subgenres of romance and comedy. And they just couldn't find it anywhere. And so they came to us. And that's true for the Wattpad side as well.
Erik, do you feel like you're, you know, in terms of looking for content, you know, that's fitting more in a category for male or female or YA or?
Yeah, totally. I mean, we think we made a movie, we did an equity investment in a movie with a Mexican star named Kate Castillo, and it was a female-led thriller. There's just certain categories, that's one of them, that we think are undersupplied because precisely what Taylor's saying, which is that there's just the commissioners haven't created the ecosystem to have enough of certain types of product. And some of it is very like everybody's chasing. So like, for example, you hear all the time that almost every network is now looking for young adult properties that are kind of elevated, but not so dark. And there's a lot of people chasing that. We are too. But yeah, like romances in nations or religions or ethnic groups that haven't always had romances supplied to them, female-led thrillers, those are things that are like super important, and there's not enough of them.
And how do you guys feel about, being able to, is there room to franchise any of these properties? It's one thing to look at IP to purchase to make into great series. And you did mention Squid Games, which is, I think for our audience is also looking at, are there places that can be discovered where they're not making one-off series or one-off, IP purchases, but really looking at how, more towards what Marvel has done for their things outside of superheroes, because they've clearly dominated that space. Do you see ways of being able to expand, even smaller IPs, and where do those licensing opportunities come?
I'd say probably, and it's probably right under our noses. I mean, like Casa de Papel, for example, there's now going to be the Korean version, and there's going to be, you'd eventually imagine a world after they rest the property that they would do spin-off movies and miniseries and all that sort of stuff. Certainly it's the case with webtoons. I think some of the stuff that Taylor's doing is really interesting. You could envision lots of different things at Tower of God and things like that get made in different ways. But what's a little unique about Marvel that isn't that easy to replicate is that it's an entire universe that had 40 years or 50 years to incubate before it even got to television. And so there was a lot of character crossover and plot work that had gone into it that I don't know if you can just, I believe those franchises exist. I see them all over the place. I think Attack on Titan is a franchise that's like that. I think One Piece is definitely a franchise like that, but I don't know how easy it is to create an entire universe, at least quickly.
Yeah, are you, Kymber, are you speaking specifically of creating a universe of characters, or like a single piece of IP that could potentially expand as a franchise?
I think in terms of most IP creators have to start from a place. And so they may not necessarily be thinking of franchise. They may be, but if we're speaking about romantic comedies in particular, or serving an underrepresented group, and with the ability now with so many streaming platforms to make very specific niche content, is there room to have other licensing opportunities for these pieces of content, and where do you see that might fall?
Everyone I've been talking to, not everyone, I shouldn't say everyone, but a lot of people I've been talking to recently are discussing this holistic 360 approach to IP. And that's been going on for a long time, but I feel like we've reached sort of a tipping point where people are actually acting on that. So while I can't give names or titles specifically here, I do know that there are multiple companies that I've talked to that are developing a film, a TV series, a video game, all in concert with each other. So it's becoming more and more of a thing. Developing an animated series that supports the streaming live action series, things of that nature going on. So I think we're going to see more and more and more of this. And once that proof of concept has been showcased to be successful, we'll see more and more of it. We've also seen that there can be surprising franchises in areas where there may not have been before. So if you have a good commercial hook, so like thinking of romance or YA rom-coms such as The Kissing Booth, which was based on a Wattpad book, or All the Boys I've Loved Before. You know, these weren't necessarily obvious franchises, and yet they had a strong enough hook that could carry that series into more than one storyline.
Yeah, I'd say a little bit of the challenge is that the global streamers have so much power that those franchises are being created, but they're being created outside of the producer ecosystem. So, you know, The Witcher, for example, is live action and animation and spin-off. And Game of Thrones, you'd think in hindsight, I mean, they're getting to that place, but they're doing a bunch of spin-offs and animated series, and but maybe harder to create that alchemy that Marvel had, where they had time and a different way of developing characters before it got gobbled up by the ecosystem. So that might be a little more challenging now.
And that's a good way to think about, you know, building up your IP. Takeaway is, you know, being able to grow an audience for your IP initially in your own country, so that it draws attention and can create interest in other markets for that license. Do you feel that there's any particular place you would look, you know, to purchase IP? Where do you think the next franchise might come from? Could it be a webtoon or game? I mean, you know, it definitely is coming from everywhere, but yeah,
I mean, for sure, I would say it's not so, I mean, Taylor would know better than I would, but it's not so easy to get a hold of webtoons from Korea. But there's a bunch of webtoons that should be massive franchises. Same thing with manga in Japan, for sure. And some of them you see are coming out now, and who knows how they'll do, but One Piece and Attack on Titan's in development, and Cowboy Bebop, and so it's happening. I would definitely look on the publishing and the comic book side. Maybe I would look in places like India too, which is more nascent. It's definitely happening.
For sure, absolutely. I mean, to your earlier point at the beginning, top of this call, you mentioned you know, all of the renewed interest in Korean IP. And we're seeing that a significant lift post Squid Game. My phone is definitely ringing more than before, which is great for everyone, because there is just tremendous IP out of Korea, both from the web novel side and from the manhwa / webtoon format. Yeah. So I think, look, we know that every medium has, you know, those blockbusters that come out of it, right? So, you know, Halo came from video games and then crossed over multiple mediums. Harry Potter came from books and crossed over multiple mediums. Star Wars started film, right? Crossed over. Walking Dead started as comic. So everyone has their top line IP that come from a specific medium. It's inevitable that webtoon will have one as well.
Mm-hmm.
I really do, and am still finding producers in the US that do not know what a webtoon is. Mm-hmm. You know, from your perspective, do you feel when it will become more known to, you know, buyers here in the US? Taylor, do you have a feel for that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm kind of saying this half sarcastically and half with love. When I first started kind of doing outreach to the Hollywood community in a big way, starting in 2019, it was pretty, what's the word I'm looking for? It was a bit surprising to me, but I came to understand that just, you know, we were the best kept secret in Hollywood, to be quite honest. And so when I was talking to a lot of studio execs, and that first 6 months to a year, people would say, "Oh yeah, we know you. You're that Japanese manga company, right?" And I say, "No. Well, first we're Korean. It's like, and it's manhwa, not manga." And we kind of start from there and do a bit of an education. So I think the first year, 2019, was really about educating and doing as much outreach as possible. But fortunately, you know, with that sort of effort and with our agency, you know, at our disposal to sort of spread the word, that has shifted quite a bit in those 2.5, 3 years. And now I would say I rarely walk into a meeting, at least with Hollywood execs that don't know something about us. And then the tipping point, because we have so many projects in development, and that are you know, haven't yet come out, we're going to see a lot more Webtoon content on screens in the near future. So, you know, as you know, Sweet Home did very, very well for Netflix. I think it was in the top 10 in like 70 territories around the world. When we released Tower of God on April 1st, 2020, in the heat of the pandemic, one of my favorite anecdotes is that we kicked COVID's butt that day. We were trending higher than COVID on Twitter worldwide for Tower of God. So you can see the potential of some of this IP. It just hasn't, a lot of it hasn't hit the screens yet.
Yeah, it's really exciting to see so much content being generated, definitely from Webtoons. I would love to kind of summarize what we've been talking about in general for the audience in terms of, you know, keeping in mind when they are creating IP, especially for the global market. You know, you touched on just unique characters, honest, disrupting even your own culture, you know, rising some of that to the top, you know, really looking at a global strategy for some of your IP, and really building up your own audience within your country to really get that notice from, again, other buyers outside of that particular local language. Is there any other advice that you can give to IP license holders in terms of things that they might be thinking about or should be thinking about as they approach, you know, selling and creating IP that would be interesting for film and TV?
I can, Eric.
Yeah.
I would say I don't want to sound like a shill and that I'm constantly promoting our companies, but even if I wasn't working in my current position, I would make this recommendation. I think that if Webtoon and Wattpad had existed 20 years ago, that would have been probably my life course. My life path would have changed, because I think it is a tremendous opportunity to, from a global perspective, because we're, you know, there are Wattpad and Webtoon platforms around the world where you can upload your own IP. There's no more gatekeeper. You know, it's user-generated content, so you can immediately launch your own novel, or, you know, if you're an artist or you want to join forces with an artist, you can create your own comic, and you can immediately leverage, you know, this amazing global footprint that we have and get eyeballs on your IP. Not only can you generate, you know, brand equity for your property and gain readership and metrics, which will be helpful in selling it, but also fans that will support you and be your advocates and emissaries for promoting your work. So I think those are two great examples of places where you can take your IP if you're just starting out.
Eric, do you have any other advice?
No, look, I mean, I think there's hundreds of thousands of books and games and comic books, and you know, a couple hundred series that get made per year that have global audiences. And so sometimes I think we're overly spooked by this notion of how hard it is to find things. There's a deep trove. And if I'm on the IP side, the flip side is I don't think you can necessarily wait for your IP to be discovered. And so it's what platforms do you put it on, or what producers do you connect with that have a reputation that would support, like, making international TV?
Well, definitely, the two of you would be a really good start. I want to wrap up this panel. I really appreciate your time and thank you for coming on. And I wish that you all have a very successful LicensingCon 2021. Thank you so much.
Thanks.